Hello, everyone. This is Under the Mayo, and I'm here with some very special guests. Maybe the most special guests I've had on this channel for an interview. I'm here with the production crew of the incredible RoboCop documentary, RoboDoc. I'm here with co-writers and co-directors Chris Griffiths, Eastwood Allen, and the producer Gary Smart. Guys, how are you doing today?
Very
Big hype
well.
already. Biggest guess you've had, Mayo.
Well, I over the past year, I've had some pretty cool game directors on here, but I'm like, you guys made a documentary about my favorite movie of all time, so I'm quite happy to have you on here.
No, thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
So I guess I'd like to start there. What's your earliest memory of the original film? For me, it was like seeing it on TV when I was way too young, 6 or 7. Dad changing the channel when they shot Murphy, so I wouldn't see it, and then me getting all upset that he wouldn't let me see the violence, and then getting the little toys. I mean, did you guys also see the movie when you were way too young, or did you discover it later in life? How did it go for you each? Who wants to start?
We were all way too young. Should we let Gary start? Because Gary, you're always the last to add to this
I know,
story.
yeah.
You've got probably the most fun
Age before
story.
beauty.
Right.
My story. I mean, these lads are probably sick to death of hearing it, but you've not heard it, so it's important. So yeah, I mean, like everybody else, I watched it at a very, very early age, like we all did. But I remember going to my friend Ben Sparry's house, and he had it on video, and we decided to reenact the bitches scene. We had no bitches, just me and him together. But we had sherbet dip, which is a kind of powdered candy. I'm not sure if you have it in the States or in Canada, but we lined it up on his bedroom dresser and started snorting it, not having any idea what it was. I mean, it didn't influence me to go and kill cops, but it influenced me to snort sherbet dip. But yeah, so I was very early when I watched it, probably about 8 or 9, possibly. Yeah, so that's my first memory of RoboCop was snorting sherbet dip.
Well, I would think that most kids would like maybe try to imitate the Coke shootout scene,
Yeah,
but you're going straight to the bitches
we
leave
were just
scene.
we were just snorting it off each other. He was bitch number 1, I was bitch number 2.
Okay.
Gary, what did you use for the snorter? Was it a dollar bill, a pound,
No,
or was it a fiver?
I don't no. The licorice stick. The licorice stick, yeah. I just remember just going out on the table, like literally my finger across my nose, not having any clue what. And again, being that young, not knowing what drugs were, and just being having a very fizzy kind of nose after. So that was it.
I bet that stung so much because
Yeah.
that stuff was sour as shit.
Well, when
Yeah.
when you're that young, you don't even have any real concept of
No.
what even is going on. I mean, I like when I was in elementary school, kids were passing around Kool-Aid, saying that like if you inhale it, it's like a high, and so all the kids are like sucking Kool-Aid dust out of a rolled up piece of paper, and it was just awful, right? But
Yeah.
guys, Eastwood, Chris, what's your earliest RoboCop memory?
Go on, East.
These guys are sick of this. So mine was I had it on VHS, a truncated version, which my uncle cut together. My uncle was a projectionist at a movie theatre here in England, in the north of England, and he was 10 years older than my dad. So my dad would get all of the sort of special edits that his big brother would make for him on the tapes. And I was obsessed with superheroes at sort of 2, 3 years old. So my dad had his big brother cut together a violence-free version of RoboCop,
Oh,
which it still had a load. I definitely remember seeing a load of squibs and obviously out of context blood splatters and whatnot. But a lot of I didn't get to see any of Murphy's death. It all started from Bob Morton's unveiling for me. So
oh.
it was the titles, then it started with Bob introducing RoboCop. So I didn't get to see the full version till I was like 8 or 9, which again traumatized me for years seeing that. I was 3 when I saw a version of RoboCop.
3. Jeez. Okay.
3.
All right, Chris.
Eastwood when I was about the same age as you, mate. I was about 6 years old, and I think my old man was definitely into that kind of stuff. And I know he had like the vinyl kit for Ed 209, and I possibly had the Nintendo games before I saw the film. So I knew kind of who he was. And then it's kind of like, oh, well, the next level up is to watch the film. So similar, but a bit unlike Eastwood's story, my mum actually was the one to record it on its UK TV premiere. And it was already like heavily censored. but she actually did some further edits of her own. So like every time it got to like, you know, anything that remotely violent, intense or sexual, it would like cut to the commercials on TV. So it'd go from like, oh, something bad's about to happen, and then the TV would go static, and then it would like come in either at a different point in the film or, you know, a commercial for like Diet Coke or something. So that was my, I think like a lot of us, or something like Eastwood, it was this kind of gradually peeling the way that the layers of the film. You see it heavily truncated, then you see the theatrical version, and then of course, you know, that was only a couple of years later, which was mind-blowing. And then of course, like within a couple of years of that, I think my dad had bought a pirated tape of the US Criterion DVD, where it's like, oh my god, even more gore. So that's what's like I've really enjoyed about my experience of RoboCop, is kind of just watching it more and more and more as the years have gone on.
Yeah, that's interesting to see it in various forms. I remember when the Criterion DVD actually came out. I was there day one. I bought that thing, and what's amazing to me is that director's cuts usually have some significant changes or significant additions. But the director's cut of RoboCop is what? It's like 15 seconds longer or something like it's already such a perfect film that there are no deleted scenes. There's nothing that they're like, oh, we cut this, but we really wanted to include. No, it is the film it is supposed to be, and there's just a little bit of extra violence for a little bit of extra. Oh God, that's uncomfortable or that's ridiculous, but nothing actually changes in it, which is it's rare for a director's cut, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
We've actually got Frank Uriosti, the editor, talking about it in the documentary, how they finish like a week or two after the filming, sorry. That usually with films, it takes them a while for the editors to keep up because there's just so much stuff coming in.
Right.
But him and his team were able to keep up with Verhoeven's sort of concise shooting methods, if you like. Not too many takes, not too much, like you said, either side. So it was a pretty quick turnaround for the edit team.
Yeah, there's no like alternate ending where, you know, it was all a dream or, you know, Clarence was actually RoboCop the whole time or some bullshit. It's just nice to have a movie that's so efficient, and I guess I miss that about like 80s and 90s action movies where they were under 2 hours. And it's just in and out, and it's a breeze. It could have been a little bit longer, but like if it had been longer, it would have started to feel like a drag maybe, or something that didn't need to be there would be there. And now every movie is what, 220 or more now.
Yeah, for sure.
And they can never make their minds up what they're doing with them either. That's always the thing, isn't there? Alternative versions or any sort of interference from outside parties. Whereas, yeah, you're right. But I think, you know, certainly going through making this doc, you know, in a scene by scene fashion. Sorry, jumping ahead there, but it really proves just how there's no fat on this film. Yeah. It really is, you know, in a biased sense, perfect.
Yeah, it's perfectly edited. It's perfectly paced, which is something that doesn't really get enough credit for. Everyone talks about the satire elements, the action, the violence, the humor, right? But just the filmmaking behind it and the editing process and how it flows together is something that I think is underappreciated. It's just such a smooth watch.
Yeah, for sure.
So watching your documentary was really exciting to me. Before I get into the things I wanted to talk about from it, I wanted to ask, when did this actually start? Because I seem to remember like 9 years ago looking up RoboCop footage or like behind the scene footage on YouTube and being blown away by certain interviews I was seeing. And then I heard about your documentary a few years ago that it was in production. And I was like, is that the same documentary stuff I was watching on YouTube like 9 years ago? Have they been doing this for 10 years? Like, how long has this been going on?
Since 2016, but what's funny, I had a nosy the other day actually, is there's still copies of our original trailer up there in the comment section. Is absolutely hilarious because it's just like, where the fuck is this thing? Like every few months, right. It's like for like 6 years. So 2016 we went out and shot it. Was it June, July? When we went to July and not, yeah, I've got a folder for it. It's like July and not back end of first open of bloody August, start of August was when we got back and had archived everything. So yeah, it's been a while, but this is, I mean, it's us, it's Adam, it's Mikey Perez. There's like 6 people in total that sort of worked on this and put it together. We've all got full-time jobs. So that's why it took so long, and it became a beast, as I'm sure we'll talk about in this interview. But it expanded. It started off with like 16 people, and then we came back with 60 odd interviewees. So it morphed. So yeah, we definitely had bitten off more than we could chew, but we'd rather put that time and effort into it. And yeah, all the patience that was involved and all the hassle that Gary was getting.
Harry,
So,
who's Harry?
Who's Harry? Someone else.
Yeah,
With a freelance.
but I think the thing is we forget about. I know we hate the word now, COVID, but we forget that was 2 years. You know, it really killed a lot of things for everybody. So, and we spent 3 years chasing. Well, we spent 5 years chasing Weller, but we spent 3 years actively chasing Weller, where we kind of gave up then around the COVID period. We gave up. We thought, it was done. So I think we were always hoping it was going to be, we're going to get him. When we started shooting, we were still shooting for probably nearly 18 months after with outsourcing. People would pop up, so that impacted it as well as obviously we were finishing off some other documentaries. So I think sometimes it seems like a long time, and we kind of criticize ourselves now quite openly about it because it was such a long time. But I think, as Issa said, there's so many reasons why. And I think that 2 years of COVID, I mean, it helped us to a degree. Obviously, I know Eastwood will testify to that. But at the same time, regards to the business side of it, it was dead. Nothing was happening. We couldn't interview anybody. Nobody was being interviewed. We were lucky that we got Weller straight after COVID, because a lot of people were reluctant to be interviewed still. In studios and with strangers. So it's been a very long journey.
Chris has gone elaborating on what Eastwood had said, how this thing just grew and grew. We knew we wanted to make a documentary. We always try and make the most in-depth documentaries on all subjects that we've covered, films. But with this, it was just a different beast, and everything just was a knock-on effect. So going from 16 people confirmed at the start to coming back with 60, to then the way Eastwood was assembling the edit, to like, all right, well, actually, looks like we've got everything scene by scene here. So there's gaps to be filled. So there was the outsourcing, as Gary had said. We went over, a couple of us, to Munich to get Jost Vacano, who I think was
that was wonderful.
Anyways, yeah, the DP, but. It's like, actually, well, is this person? And then Eastwood was getting in touch with people. So really, we thought to ourselves, like, shit, we really have bitten off more than we could chew. However, we're already far down this path now. We might as well continue it, and that was the thing. It was just like, well, okay, if we've gone this far, we might as well see it through to make it as definitive as possible. So it went from essentially this is going to be a big documentary to actually, no, it's a scene by scene dissection, of a whole entire film, of which there's a lot of people to kind of cater to in that respect.
It comes across as like a celebration in a way, because you just it's like you got everybody. People I'm first of all, I'm really impressed that none of your interviews are online. Everything you did is like in person. Like it could have been easy to have half of these things just be Zoom calls, all right? But you did it for real.
Well, it could have been easy as well. I know, again, it's cliche, but it could have been easy just to release this thing 5 years ago, and without Weller, it wouldn't have been 4 hours. It wouldn't have been so much detailed. It would just been probably a 90-minute to 100-minute documentary on Blu-ray, which would have been independently produced, which most of the world wouldn't have seen because it would have been done by us, in terms of our old model. So I think, these cliches say things happen for a reason, but without that longevity of the project, we wouldn't have got to certain landmarks, and we wouldn't be where we are now with a 4-hour documentary, which is just season 1 of 3 seasons. With Weller, with the amount of obviously work that Eastwood and Chris put in, but Eastwood did the graphics and all the animations and the artists that we found, Eastwood found, and the musicians that were found as well. That all takes time, so we get criticised. But I genuinely, my always is, and I remember Eastwood saying a few years ago, once it's out, they'll stop moaning. Once it's out, people will see how good it is. And I think, it's taken a long time, but we could have easily, as you said, just, took the £33,000 which was originally raised, used that, got a load of outsourced interviews, which were online, as you said, threw them in, covered it in footage, but instead we put 200 grand of our own money into it as well, and spent 6 years of fighting with each other to get it done, and the fighting's not over, because it's a very much, it is probably when you look at passion project in a dictionary, it's going to be RoboDoc because it literally is blood, sweat, and tears. I think they'll make a documentary one day of us, how this was made,
You
how we didn't
could.
kill it, how we didn't kill each other yet. So
Yeah, that's I don't know, maybe that's just because I come from editing. I do video editing all the time. The editing on this is just phenomenal. Like I couldn't stop thinking as I was watching it. I was like, wow, how the fuck did you organize all this stuff? You got so much, and it's really well separated kind of into themes. And I love how episode 1 ends on this cliffhanger when you pull in the villains right there at the end of episode 1, and I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta go. I gotta go directly to episode 2. That was a really smart move to keep people hooked. But you said that this is season 1 of 3 seasons.
Chris,
Yeah. So, oh, go on, Chris. Do you want to talk?
No,
Yeah,
go on.
I'd love to hear about that because I had no
All right, 'cause Chris is
idea.
looking at- Yeah. So originally, as you mentioned, sort of the chapters and the episodic structure, that was a necessity in terms of like our distributor. They wanted it to be episodic. We sort of pitched it as originally we were saying, oh, we'll just sell the full 4-hour documentary, and then our sales agents was sort of umming and ahhing, and then I'd suggested episodic, thinking, and I know everybody's sort of like, oh, that makes more sense. So then obviously we needed to think about how we'd structure the episodes, and it just happened that like in 1 hour and 4 minutes or whatever in the first episode, that's when we introduced the gang. So that teed up a really nice, actually. It does work really well actually when people feedback on that cliffhanger ending, and that was never originally the intent. It was just the full 4-hour thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then in terms of like the second and third season, so in that original trailer that we put together, which was almost like a bit of a sort of showcase of the whole project. It's more than a trailer, really. It's a bit of a featurette. It's like 6 minutes long. We put the whole trilogy in there and the TV show, the Canadian TV show from the early 90s. And so I know there's people out there going, where, it's 4 episodes and where are the sequels? And they're coming in future seasons. So we've got season 2, which is RoboDoc 2, which is for the Robocop sequel, Robo 2. Then Robocop 3, which will feature also the TV show and other aspects of the legacy. We've got like comic book guys, we've got video game guys, people that we interviewed throughout, the whole franchise. So a lot of, like we said, we initially set out to get as much as we could, and we came back, and bearing in mind there's like 5 of us, we came back with 90 hours of footage is what we got, 77 hours for the first movie. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Are you going to cover Prime Directives?
No.
No. Okay.
We're not.
We had to draw a line somewhere. I mean, like, as Eastwood said, and going back to what I said before as well, you've got obviously like cross-pollination of some people, Nancy Allens and whatnot, who obviously feature in the first film. So it's like, oh, you're in the second one. Let's talk a bit about that. And the third one. Yeah. I mean, I can remember that sort of original Kickstarter video we did, and Eastwood goes, we'd also like to touch on the sequels. And again, it's that kind of addictive nature of where we'd got to, and, being a bit overzealous. It's like, oh, let's go into 2. Let's go into 3. And, oh, actually, Gary's managed to acquire Robert Burke's contact number. And I think there was a little mindset first as well. It's like, well, if we can't get Peter Weller, we'll sure as hell get Robo 3 and Richard Eden from the series. And then as it stands, there's like somewhere in the region of about a 2.5-hour rough cut for RoboDoc 2, about 90 minutes for the third film, and about 40 or 50 minutes for the series. Because we just couldn't help ourselves. And with subsequent shoots, we went to Vancouver the following year. Of which it was like, oh, there's a few people nearby us, from Robocop the series. Well, get them in.
Yeah.
So we just couldn't help ourselves really, So we just thought, well, sod it, we're this far now. So I think the pressure's on, given the reception for this first one, that we've really got to kind of try and sort of sustain that momentum with these follow-ups. But we've got a lot to show off, certainly for 2 as well. The wealth of behind the scenes content we were given by people like Paul Salmon and whatnot is unbelievable. So it's nice to be able to package all this stuff together really in one complete project.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you have enough footage to have this go on even further if you really wanted it to. The amount of people that you got on there, what impresses me about the interviews that you did was that it got me to think about aspects of characters that even I, as a fan who has done analysis videos and shown this movie to all my friends and seen it at least 50 times and gone to cult screenings in theaters, like even stuff that I never even really thought about, like I don't remember her character's name, but the lady in the laboratory, when she takes off her glasses,
Yeah.
right, and she talks about her own character. I'm like, oh yeah, she is a character, even though she's not really in the movie so much. She's there, and as an actress, she has to know who her character is. And she talks about how she uses the glasses to kind of like put up a facade, and then that's her one moment of vulnerability when she takes off her glasses. I was like, wow, I was like, there was a lot of thought actually put into every single person in this movie. I was wondering if maybe you could elaborate on what are some of the kind of small character interviews that maybe gave you an additional insight that you hadn't considered before.
Ooh, good question. That. Ugh. Yeah,
First thing
Sage
that comes to
Park
mind is
taking a
the
glass.
cops, isn't it? We talk about like the cops as a group, the fact that they're named after serial killers. Chris and I, when we first heard that, because we didn't know,
I had no
and they were
clue.
shocked that we didn't know because we sort of knew everything else. They were like, "Did you not know that we were named after serial killers?" And then we were like, "No." And then we obviously loaded up the script and was like, "How did we never spot that?"
Well, Manson always stands out, right?
Yeah.
Because he's like, hey, I'm Manson. And you're like, oh, because that's just such a huge name. But you don't really hear the other cops' names being thrown about in the movie. So how would you know?
Yeah, that's true. I'm trying to think of some other characters.
There's the
think
Ramirez.
I think it was nice that we got. I know we go on about it, but even like SD Nemeth, in terms of, I know that East will tell you about the moment. Obviously, we got him, and as Bixby Snyder.
That made me so happy.
But it's so weird because he's so iconic. Yet people don't ever cover him or interview him in any kind of articles, any books that have come out, any featurettes. Yet everybody quotes that line. Everybody knows who he is, and he was hard to get. But I mean, I know when you had him Eastwood and showed him the clips, he just didn't realise, did he? The fandom.
We were in the production office, weren't we, after the interview? We were just so chuffed that Gary and Mikey, our other producers, had got him in, and Chris and I were literally getting him to sign posters and do the line for us on camera to send to our family and friends and stuff. And we said to him, like, do you know that you're like on mugs and on T-shirts and memes and all? And he was like, no. And we took him to the production office. I got the laptop out and we just showed him like on Redbubble, like you can get his face on a T-shirt, and he was literally like, wow, wasn't he? Like,
how does he not know?
He just didn't. Well, he's not really on social. What's amazing, I'll say this, is since the documentary, he's been doing conventions. Since we not it's just because we've released the documentary, but we've been tagged in like posts where he's been at conventions in the States doing. He's even got like a cutout TV where he'll have the person who wants to sign in and him in the telly to do sort of a bit for camera, if you like. But that's great because he was never really on social. I think Gary, you managed to find him by somebody that knew, like, was it a his or something?
It was something like that, yeah. So he wasn't on socials. He had no agent. There was no contact details online at all. He was living in the hills somewhere, quite recluse, probably, I'd say. And then I did, as you do, internet search, whatnot. And I thought one day, let's just search on Facebook for his name. It's quite a distinct name, isn't it? SD Nemeth. And I found somebody they were in a barbecue with an SD Nemeth. That's all they said, at barbecue, blah. So I messaged them, and then back and forth. And it was the SD Nemeth. They got us his details. We got obviously his phone number, and then it just shows, when you do a little bit of digging through Facebook, people tag somebody in, and that was it, and it was just by fluke, really. And as Eastwood said, it's just nice that he's getting the recognition there, and I think that was a nice part for us as well. And we did it on other projects where people haven't realised the fandom around their characters, and maybe end up doing conventions. I know what Eastwood said, but I think probably because of us, because I know that SD got an agent because of obviously doing some of the promo stuff with us. And obviously when the doc come out, he started doing stuff, and there's obviously an interest for that character from the fans at the shows. So I hope he's benefiting from it, because before we did ROBODOC, he was out, he was uncontactable and he wasn't doing any shows. I think a lost character, really. So that's one of the nicest parts, I think, that came from that project was obviously him finding his character.
Another interview that I really liked was the captain of the SWAT team in front of the Capitol building.
Yeah, he was a lovely guy as well, wasn't he? Here, Michael. I just Is it Michael, wasn't it? I'm crap.
Yeah, Michael Gregory.
He was just, and even now, like even the last 6 years after filming, he'll message you spontaneously or tag you in something or
always
comment
get a nice happy birthday off.
You know what I'm saying? Yeah, he's such a nice guy. And I was really happy because we kind of were and ahhing about sending links out to people because we had distribution deals. It gets real difficult. I think we decided between the three of us, we'll send links out of the show to obviously select kind of cast and crew. And I remember sending it to him because I think he's been such a supporter of us.
Yeah.
For no gain at all. Just always been nice, always been courteous, always asked how we're getting on. And I know he loved it when he watched it. He absolutely adored it. So he was a lovely guy.
Yeah,
I think it shows as well, like with these sort of players, you know, non-leads like this, like, you know, it's a first for a lot of people in this documentary. And I think what's a testament, you know, to the film, especially the environment in which it was made, you know, quite fraught, just how much reverence all these people have for the film. I mean, another standout who's there right from the get-go is Diane Robin, who plays one of the bitches. He's been there right from the get-go. We definitely made some new online chums during the course of this production, but I think, you know, for them to be highlighted, which to us is almost like a no-brainer. You know, maybe I'm not so surprised that like a big studio effort wouldn't have gone to town like we did in acquiring these people. But again, going back to what I said before about how this film's perfect, I don't think there's one bad note in amongst the cast.
Yeah.
So to us, it's like a no-brainer to get these people. But, you know, testament to all of them, they all performed so well for us with their interviews, the right level of enthusiasm and tone. And so, yeah.
I think I've gone. Sorry,
I was just gonna say that it's just not obvious. Like when you go into a documentary, like of course you're expecting Weller, you're expecting Verhoeven, but then you know the SWAT captain shows up, or then you get to talk to Murphy's wife, and it's just like. One by one, people just keep showing up, and you're like, "What? I never expected."
Yeah.
You're like, "Oh, that one person who's in the background who had one line. Oh, I want to hear their story."
Well, we on our first ever documentary, Leviathan, the Hellraiser doc, we kind of said from day one on that you know we would get as many people as possible who added value because they were there. And I think when you interview sometimes the bigger players, particularly when you look at the bigger stars, for them it's just a job, and if they get onto the set, they do, they learn their lines, they quite isolate themselves. Other people, the bit players, for them it's a huge thing, really. As a struggling actor, to be on a set like that with a director like Verhoeven and obviously people like Weller, they remember every single detail. They remember. Now we're not silly that we interview like the lampshade, and stuff like that, or the catering assistant. But what we do, we interview obviously people who add value to the scenes, and I think this was a perfect project for that, because obviously the lads were doing well. It evolved to be scene by scene dissection, and that then we started looking for people as it went on. But these people have really interesting stories, and even like, I remember when we did Leviathan, we interviewed a clapper loader, and people going, "What are you interviewing him for?" Well, he was there every single bloody scene with that clapper, every single scene.
Gave good anecdotes.
Yeah. Oh, he's got some of the funniest stories, because for them it's a completely different experience than for Weller, say. And even though Weller wasn't a huge star at the time, he's still the star. So I think people like Michael Gregory and Diane Robin, I think they add so much gold and value to these projects, and for them it means a lot more. Well, obviously that's probably not for me to say, but I think for them, being in a project like this and celebrating something they did 30 years ago, you get more out of those people, because they really, they've never been asked to be on camera before. Yet that scene with the bitch is so iconic. Mm-hmm. I was snorting sherbet dip up my nose when I was 9 years old. But everybody remembers that scene, and it's like, why not celebrate that? And I think that's why I love doing these projects. I love finding people like that, little bit actors, because also you recognise someone and you go, they were in that other film as well, and they were in this, and they were in that. And we've done a little things like that in the past, like even like Randy Moore, we did a little featurette with him on The Exorcist 3, and it's like we can get away with doing stuff like that when you meet these people as well, and it's just contacts to have on future projects as well.
I think as well, when you're a fan, like when we all love making of, part of the enjoyment of watching that is when is seeing the reveal of like the cast and crew and how they look now. I remember, you know, the Blade
Yeah,
Runner documentary when Sean Young rocks up and you're like, Sean Young's here. Like that is part of the fun. So we get to do that like 65 times pretty much, and trying to be fun and spice it up with like introductions for the gang and for the bitches. And obviously when Weller shows up like that, that's part we know when people watch this stuff that they're gonna get a kick out of seeing just those faces in modern day. So it was fun digging, wasn't it? I was going to say the one person that we didn't get in the doc, but he actually contributed, was Jimmy Murphy. So Jason Levine, who played James or Jimmy Murphy.
I was on the edge of asking you about him. Please.
So I reached out to him on Facebook, and he and basically tried to convince him to buy a green screen so that he could do an interview. But by that point, I think Gary would have killed me for one. But I think by that point we were wrapping up. I'd finished it all, and I was just like, right, who else can I get? But he was like super. He's seen it, he loved it, but he was like super. He said he didn't remember much because he was like 11. But he sent us a Polaroid, which is actually in the documentary, which is that alternative Halloween Polaroid that's in the doc. So it's like a great sort of exclusive for us to have in the doc. But he was just like, best of luck, guys, but I've not bought a green screen for you. So, and we wanted to with a green screen.
Who coming up across these 60-some actors, which is the one that you came up to and said, "Wow, you look exactly like you did 40 years ago"? Is that Kurtwood Smith?
I think Kurtwood Smith hasn't aged a day, has he? Kurtwood Smith.
Yeah.
I mean, Nancy Allen still looks great though, doesn't she?
Nancy looks incredible.
Yeah.
Nancy Nash, the guy who played Nash.
Yeah.
Calvin Young's another one.
Calvin Young, yeah.
We should have just given him a bandana, shouldn't we, Calvin?
Yeah.
Right,
like,
Eastwood, go back and comp one on now.
I think a lot of people there, don't look too bad. Since it's a 30-year-old film, you could recognise them straight. There's nobody you go, who was that? I'm not quite sure. Yeah. They're so distinct in the casting as well. These people are character actors, so they all have that something, don't know? These people do, and they're all faces you recognise. Even the guy who was a stunt coordinator, who's one of the Souls men, the drug baron. Everyone knows him from like every film in the 80s. You recognise that face. So I think he looks exactly the same. I mean,
is it Lee? No, not Lee DeBrew.
Alan Graff.
No, the one.
Yeah,
I mean,
he's like Boogie Nights and all that, isn't he?
Yeah. He looks exactly the same. So I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, we look exactly the same from 7 years ago. We don't. We don't.
Yeah, we're coming up on the last minute, so do we want to jump into the other room and we can continue?
Yeah. Until Chris might start talking.
Okay. Now we'll go ahead and cut it there, and I'll see you guys in the other room. You also got a lot of great interviews with the effects department. I learned so much about the behind the scenes, just the creation. Not just, the creation of the suit is stuff that a lot of fans do know because that stuff's kind of easy to find. All right, but what's not easy to find is the fact that Kenny's left testicle was shattered or whatever in the Ed 209 moment. Are you able to watch that scene and not think about that poor actor's ball?
I love how specific you are, the fact that you know that it's the left one as well. But he just said left nut, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does.
Yeah.
And then it freeze frames as he's like wincing from the explosion on the left side of his groin. But like I rewatched the movie recently, and I was thinking about that, but the cut is so quickly that it's impossible to even if you know that's what happened, you can't see it. It's just gone so quickly.
Yeah, the fact that he was there for like 2 days doing all of the re-squibbage, for the reshoots, and
what a nightmare!
Effort, like I would have called it quits. Like he was just doing it again and again and again, and the cleanup as well that must have been involved in that. But Bohemian just wanted more and more.
That's some of the most fascinating stuff about your documentary, is that stuff that you don't think about because you just see the final scene. You just see him ba 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 ba. But then to learn that there were 2 to 3 days of 12-hour reshoots of getting blown apart with squibs, it's like, what a nightmare situation. And it shows I don't know, on one side I want to say the dedication, but on the other side the obsessiveness, right, with creating this masterpiece. That's the kind of effort that goes into it from the actors having to go through. I mean, like, I want to say, the dedication on part of the actors. Like, well, I mean, it was his job, right? Like, that's what he's getting paid for. And it's like, what is he going to say? No? right, and walk off set. No, like he had to do it. So really, it's just the insistence of the director to put him through that. And I mean, for all we know, there was a perfectly fine take on day one that just didn't get used or something like that. But I guess the final take was the one where they had the spaghetti pouch in his shirt, and that's what. Do you guys want to elaborate a little bit on that scene specifically?
Yeah, so the effects guys were eating, I think, spaghetti squash, or this is what Kevin Page says anyway. And Verhoeven kept saying, we need more blood, bigger, better, more blood. And so they packed those sort of like baggies that were like sort of elongated condoms with this spaghetti squash, and then just, went at it with Kevin, and he was bruised to pieces for no doubt days, because that's another thing with the documentary. We've got every instance of every squib ever in that whole production is sort of examined by everybody that was involved in that. So all the cast and crew that was squibbed. Originally, we were going to do sort of like a montage, and then when the scene by scene thing came together, it made sense to put it in each scene. And what's good is everybody's got a different story. The person that complains the least is actually Nancy Allen. She says like the squibs were difficult, but the icy cold rusty water was worse than the squibs.
Yeah.
Everybody else, all the big burly men, were sort of like in tears, crying, being sick. And Nancy was like, yeah, it was bad, but the water was worse.
It was Ronnie Cox who got it the worst, I think, wasn't it? Saying how he was like almost sick. And I remember, like you said, that kind of shows the genesis of the project. You know, when this was going to be probably your standard pre-production, production, post-production kind of format prior to the whole scene by scene thing. I distinctly remember, and in fact, I think there's probably like an outtake somewhere where I almost put the words into Ronnie Cox's mouth to say, oh, can you just sort of like, you know, if I said to you, how do you feel when mentioning about squibs? Can you just sort of give us what you'd say back? So he gave us back something like, oh yeah, the squibs. And in my head at that point, I was like, oh, we'll have this montage of all the squibs featured in the film. But rightly so, we kind of ended up, you know, separating that out. And again, it's a testament to Eastwood's editing, you know, that you don't get too tired of a particular subject,
yes.
Even if there's, you know, plenty of instances. It's all spread so far out that actually, you know, it's nice to kind of bring that back in, you know, when it's necessary. But I think
you'll get a kick out of this, Mayo. Actually, we didn't put this in the documentary because I was like, this is just super overkill, and we'd have to sort of retread on what we've just looked at and with Ronnie Cox. But Ronnie talks about how he was so nervous about the squibs because he'd heard that everybody, you know, had a difficult time with it, and he realized how large the squibs were that he actually blinks before the impact, and he was like tensing before the impact. He was like, so if you go by frame, you'll see that I actually blink before it pops.
Uh-huh.
You'll have to do that next time. Next time you watch it.
I'm sure that's nothing compared to the glass detonating like a year before Clarence flies through it, which I'll never understand. Like, why keep that in? Why not just cut to the other side of the glass and show him flying through? Why have the full shot and have that big mistake? That's one of the only things that like bugs me when I watch RoboCop is I can't keep my eyes up. And here comes the glass.
I think that's the thing in it. When you scrutinize a film like this, you can kind of pick out the warts and all. And I think actually all things like that we address as well. You know, we never aim to make anything too sugar coated or, you know, puff pieces. We'd like to sort of identify those issues. You know, we got things where, you know, someone clearly states, I think it's Gregor Punchett's one of the guys who worked on the suit, the Robo team, you know, the fact that, you know, you can see the armpits on the suit. Obviously we address as well, speaking of Ronnie Cox, you know, the elongated arms.
Sure.
You know, so it's not perfect in that respect. You know, you can definitely see the flaws, but it kind of is part of the charm of the film in a way. And I think you only notice those things. That's the problem with the film being so addictive that you watch it more than once. Or certainly for anoraks like ourselves, you do start to pick out those things the more you watch it. Whereas that initial viewing, you're so sort of wrapped up in it, you kind of ignore it. It's only just because, you know, we're like, yeah, no, let's watch this frame by frame.
Well, if it had been made in a time where they could like digitally fix that stuff like they would today, it wouldn't be the film that it is, because it would be made in completely different circumstances, and it probably would have been a very sort of sterilized, you know, production without the drama, without the tension, without all the creative forces fighting against each other, which is what, you know, largely contributes to what it is. Speaking of effects, there's there's a lot of things that I feel kind of ashamed that I never even picked up on the fact that the little holes on RoboCop's chest are where his voice is supposed to be coming from through a speaker. I never knew that. I never knew
we
that
didn't
was
until Miles told us. We did. I don't think we ever clocked.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's ever addressed in like the script or anything. But it's just one of those because they wanted to put an OCP badge on there, and Rob Bottin said no, let's have something different. So they put like a grill on there. And that was, I don't even think that was ever addressed to anybody. I think that was more just the Rob Bottin's team's sort of idea for, you know, explaining why they're doing something.
I had never noticed, like, the moment I saw that in the documentary, I said, what? And I hit pause, and I went over to my Hot Toys 6-scale Robocop replica, and I looked at the suit, and I'm like, there's holes there. I never noticed that there's these little holes on his little right shoulder. And it just, I don't know, that was just amazing to me. And it makes sense. It makes sense because his voice is projected, right, as a speaker. There's a lot of little things like that I noticed. The painted thermal suit thing, which still, like, even now knowing it, like, I can, if I force myself to consciously notice it, sure, but it's just such a perfect effect that it's so impressive. And then the sound effect for Ed 209's leg movement being a cast iron printer. And I think one of my favorite parts of the documentary was the interview about how Ed 209, the puppeteer, actually talking about how as a puppeteer you have to form like an intimate relationship with the puppet. Like you have to be one. You have to be... Gary, I saw that look. No, you don't have to get that intimate with it, but you have to feel like you share a soul, right? So that the puppet is moving as you move, and then that's what gives Ed 209 its movement. And hearing all these people speak so passionately about their craft, on one end it was inspiring. I mean, how could it not be inspiring? But on the other end, it's also kind of saddening because that art, all these arts have been kind of lost in our main movies. I mean, you don't see squib work, right? You're not seeing people build these like giant practical effects without CG enhancements. You're not seeing people do puppetry. I mean, sure, you'll find this stuff in independent horror movies or something, right? But other than that, like, you don't get this kind of craft, and it made me think, what are documentaries going to talk about in 30 years when we examine today's movies and they interview the cast? Are we just going to be talking to a team of 20, 30, you know, high ups of the digital effects department talking about their animation techniques? And like, that's not to say that doesn't take talent and artistry. It does, but it's nothing compared to talking to the 60-year-old puppeteer talking about how he moved Ed 209's legs. I don't know.
I think the testament to the work as well is that it still stands up today. I mean, there's always flaws with obviously effects, especially even impractical. But you look at something like RoboCop, and you look at Murphy's Death. You look at Emil the Mountain Man. Those effects are still amazing. Now, if you interview somebody who did the Scorpion King or one of the Mummy films, they're not going to be able to celebrate their work other than criticize it because it ages so bad. CGI did. I think that's why we're probably now moving back towards practical effects. You look at things like Game of Thrones, you look at things like House of Usher just watched recently. It's all practical. It's enhanced obviously with CGI, but prosthetics has become such a huge thing again. But I think because people have learned that 20 years after, it just looks shit. You even watch Lord of the Rings, and I love those films, and you can see sometimes some of the wider effects with the armies and whatnot just don't look great. But I think the reason why those films last and the legacy lasts is because you said there's an intimate relationship with the puppeteer and the makeup guys, and the guys in the documentary are just passionate about what they do, and they put detail into those characters which we'd never notice. And I think that's the interesting thing I find about makeup artists, that they'll put things into that design like the Emil, which the viewer will never really ever see. But they've spent hours and days discussing that little bit of drip on the finger and nail coming out, and the skid mark on the neck from obviously when he was at the accident motorbike. That's just a craft, and that's just an art form, I think, which hopefully projects like this can celebrate, but you won't be doing that, as I said, with the Scorpion King in 10 years' time.
I think the thing is as well. Like, we were asked recently, actually, about why do we choose to kind of cover films from that period. And I think, it's a mix of things. You can sort of say what was available at that point. DVDs didn't exist. So the whole, market for behind the scenes and documentaries wasn't quite there at that point. But actually, for me, I look at this doc as celebrating more than just the film, like celebrating a time and place in Hollywood. I think, as you're saying this now and talking about the, grill on his chest, I think hearing that now has made me appreciate it all the more. That today, don't get me wrong, we're seeing some pretty fantastic designs, but a lot of them come from pre-existing materials, comic books, etc. Whereas Robocop was actually designed specifically for the film.
Yes.
So hearing all that first-hand information, all the effort that went into, design and detail for a specific project, I think is all the more impressive. But yeah, it's celebrating sort of a time, really, and it was towards the end of it as well. The practical era, sort of. If anything, we alluding to how actually there's a little kernel of CGI at play there, and I think that's what's kind of almost interesting about the Robocop franchise. Really, is it was one of the last standout effects-driven movies before everything got 180 basically into CGI.
Well, you even look at the matte paint artist, that's probably one of the last films, isn't it, with detailed matte painting like that for scenes. Now it would have been, now it's all CGI, but again, the amount of work going in to do that, the city landscape and skyline and, and the OCP building, it's just unbelievable amount of work that goes into that. And I think it's flawless, even look at the scene in the lift shaft going up.
Yeah, I was about to mention that. It's still
you can't see, you can't tell that's matte painting. And, and it's like if they did that now, it looks so sharp and so kind of like computer generated, because you can't get depth sometimes in the CGI stuff, and sometimes it's just easy to you see some films which are multi-million-pound films or multi-billion-pound films. You're going, there's no contrast, there's no depth in that character. Whereas you look at someone who's standing there with a paintbrush and you see the images of Rocco just literally painting little lights. That I just think that's what Robocop, why it's, again, other than the story, and obviously, and as Eastwood and Chris said, regards to every scene, he's good and he's on, he's on form. It's the other little bits like that add to it, amazing actors, amazing effects. And I think what I like about these projects, again, about repeat myself, is the fact that we celebrate the effects teams. I think they're the unsung heroes. I went that name drop. I went out the other day with Jeff Portis from Hellraiser, and like someone like him gets no recognition. That he's the guy that created the look of Pinhead. Clive Barker created Pinhead in the book and the script, and that class as a female kind of character with pins on its tongue and whatnot. The iconic look of Pinhead is Jeff Portis' creation, and these people don't get the credit sometimes they deserve. And I think we hopefully try and just put a little bit of light on these people, just to show that the reason why you love these films so much, and you love the look of these characters, and that iconic image of Robocop with his helmet off and the skin layered over. That's because someone like Rob Bottin sat there and drew that for his team, and his team then obviously did the appliances. It's set a little bit of recognition, I think, which people don't tend to get.
I'd like to steer this a little more towards Murphy. That's a great segue there. Now talking about the suit, but right before we do, I want to make a comment that I love. The actor that plays Nash, he makes a comment about how when they were in the back of the truck, that there was no safety harnesses or anything. that they were. Just like talking about how what they did back then, it wouldn't happen now. That they were just hanging out of the back of a truck, and if one of them fell out, they would have died, right? And Paul Verhoeven just it'll be fine. Right?
I mean, the explosions in the street, you see the outtakes, and literally, Clarence Bodica's jacket's on fire. That just wouldn't happen now. They wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow it at all now. No. I think you lose that with filmmaking. I know it's dangerous. Obviously,
goddamn health and safety.
I know, but it is. But you lose it.
It is. It's films like that and Mad Max and everything, isn't it? Those films have still got such wow factor because it's there, it's real, it feels raw, authentic. Whereas you can just pick away now at things like Compton explosions and God knows what.
Yeah,
Yeah.
or Neo in the Matrix Reloaded is a fully CGI character, and
Yeah.
like, it's like, where's the danger? Where's the
Yeah,
humanity?
but again, when you watch that back in '99, whatever it was, or 2001 or two,
2003.
it looked great. I remember watching that. The whole bit with Agent Smith.
Mhm.
You watch now and you go, it looks shit.
Yeah.
He's like elasticated, isn't he?
Yeah.
Neo is. But it's like, but again, I think because
Rich Armstrong.
we're so tuned in now. I think to effects, and I think we're spoiled. Even with computer games stuff like that. I think the problem is now people just pick up on these things being really kind of weak. Whereas if you've got special effects in front of you and it's makeup, if it's good and it's done well, that's there on the set, isn't it? It's there in front of the actors. The actors can react to it. I mean, you see things from Star Wars where it's literally a blue screen and a ball, and the actors. And I think you lose some of the acting, man, as well. If your actor can't see in front of them what the character is, you kind of lose that. And again,
there is a little moment in your documentary that's kind of like, ooh, when you're talking to the RoboCop stuntman, speaking about like the danger of practical effects. He talks about how he was the one rolling off of the parking lot and poof, falling down, and he just has this little comment where he's like, "It hurt." Still hurts to this day, and then you just cut away from him. Then it's almost like played for laughs. It's like, oh wait, that's like really sad that this guy for 40 years has body pains because one movie he did in the 80s. Like that's the downside, right, to all this, is that people can get hurt.
Well, Kevin Page never had children because of getting shot in the bollock.
What?
So, no, I'm only joking.
Oh God.
Yeah, Eastwood. As Eastwood said that to me.
Okay. All right. So
I think Russell Towery plays it down as well. I think he's like one. I know you interviewed him, didn't you, Chris? He's like such a cool. Just like, yeah, I did that. Yeah, I went to the hospital. I was back up a few hours later. Yeah, I just had a breathing tube for the gas station. I had 5 minutes of air, and it's like you had five. It's just the amount of people. Still, that's my go-to shot. If I had to show somebody a shot in the movie of like just how manic and bonkers this, the fact that nobody died making this film. It's the gas station explosion of just Robo in the foreground, but he's like this big, and the explosion just absorbs the entire screen.
And they could have done that. They could have done that scene without having a RoboCop in the explosion. They could have done that. All right, but no, they made.
Could have been in danger of looking a bit like the climax of Commando, though, because there's actually one film from the practical era when you can see all those soldiers, sort of those like model soldiers held up with props or whatever. But again, I think it's just testament to that era of filmmaking. I think all these people, regardless of the scars they carry, they don't hold anything against it. I think it's just we're in such a transitional period of time in history where what was just 20 years ago can't possibly happen now. In some cases for better, but with this, it just really kind of makes you appreciate it all the more, how this stuff was done.
So Weller's interviews were, fantastic. The guy he just steals the scene, any scene he's in. Like if he's in a room, like he's the guy, he's the voice you're listening to. And the fighting between him and Verhoeven is well documented. It's great to hear, even for the 100th time, that they are at each other's throats. But I really loved hearing him say things like, I wrote down this quote. He said, "What in God's name would this movie have been without Verhoeven?" And I loved hearing him say that regardless of what happened on set, like he knows that, like, if Verhoeven hadn't been the guy, this movie wouldn't be what it is, and it could have completely failed. And I love that there's that respect between artists, regardless of what their personal relationship is. I just absolutely adore that moment in your documentary.
I think that's actually my favorite scene as well. Again, we were asked that the other day and asked about things we didn't know, prior to making it, of which we've uncovered quite a lot today, to be honest, again. But that whole element of, I think that is the fundamental thing that Verhoeven brought, was in that sequence, but of making that judgment to put the dream sequence first, even though in the script it was all the things of Murphy, it's you, and I know you, we killed you, being before it, that would lead to it. But making that call, again, just makes you appreciate it all the more, what he was doing, and really does show. I don't think this film would have worked without him, to be honest. It was just the right people at the right time, and now I'm quoting the doc, but coming together to make it, really.
it's just like it's like fate. I was a little surprised to hear that you didn't talk about much of the drama between Rob Bottin and Verhoeven. Maybe that's because Rob Bottin isn't here to give his side, but I remember hearing things about how near the end of the production that they weren't even speaking to each other. That Rob Bottin and Verhoeven didn't even want to talk to each other, or at least one of them didn't want to talk to the other. But then once the movie premiered and they both saw it on screen, that they just kind of looked at each other and were like, "Hey, you know," because he brought Rob Bottin back for Total Recall.
Yeah.
So like they must have just buried the hatchet when RoboCop came out and be like, "Holy shit, look at what we did together." It's going to be okay.
That, and we do cover it. It's in the special features. There's a Rob Bottin tribute in the special features.
Okay.
Where we go into a little bit more about Rob. Rob wasn't there on set very much. Stefan Dupuy actually talks about Rob being on set for like, I don't know, a week out of the whole shoot, and just he didn't want to see anybody, didn't want to see Verhoeven, didn't want to see any of the producers. So there is a bit of a mention in one of the special features, which is like a Rob Bottin tribute.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I'll have to check that out. There's another good part. There's another really good part. I love that because here's something weird. It was around the time that the RoboCop remake was coming out in 2014. I think it was on the red carpet of Star Trek Into Darkness. Someone asked Weller about what he thought about the fact that they were remaking RoboCop, and he said something that blew me away. He said, "Oh, you know, the original film's a classic. You know, when it came out, you know, I saw it twice. It's a great movie." And I'm like, "You saw it twice? Like, this is how did you watch your film of RoboCop twice and then just let it go and move on with your life? Like how do you not, you know, show this to everyone?" Like, and so it felt like Weller just kind of treated this as like a movie he was in. That's how it sounded at the time.
But take that with a pinch of salt. He knows it in such depth, and he's the Miguel Ferrer tribute. I honestly don't think. I think he probably watches it every year. I just don't think he tells. Yeah,
that's what it was so weird to me about it. It didn't feel right. And then watching the documentary and hearing him speak with such reverence about the role, I'm like, either he was downplaying it or he has changed perspectives over time, because maybe there were things that soured him on it, or he got tired of being known as RoboCop or whatever. But he's maybe like a Jamie Lee Curtis thing, where it's like after Halloween she didn't want to be known as the horror actress, but now like she's like, "Hey, yeah, I'm the Michael Myers, you know, star. Like, I embrace this."
I think we definitely saw that embracement whilst making the documentary, because when we first spoke to his people back in 2016, it was an adamant no, and it was basically he's moved on. He's Dr. Peter Weller now. You know, he said everything he said about the film. There's more to say. And as we started doing the film, the documentary, he started popping up at the odd convention here. And I think the first big thing, as he sort of said, unfortunately, it was a horrible thing, was when Miguel passed away. He went to screen RoboCop for Miguel, and he went there. He said he's only going, obviously, you know, to pay tribute to him. And I think maybe that may, you know, after that, he seemed to pop up quite a lot then in conventions, and then did the KFC commercial and did some other stuff. So I think
Mortal Kombat 11.
Well, yeah. So I think he's obviously embracing it now. I think a lot of actors do that. You find it really weird, you know. I mean, when we did a documentary on Robert Englund, you know, even he had a time in the 90s where he says in the doc that he kind of like wanted to stay away from Freddy because he was so kind of, unlike Peter maybe, but you know, Robert was so kind of like connected to the role and done 7 films. But I think they suddenly embrace that fandom really and understand it's their legacy. And I think someone like Weller, who has done a lot of films, he must realise now, particularly doing the game recently, that this is his legacy. You know, this is what he's going to be remembered for, as well as all his other amazing stuff. Yeah. You know, that's got to be important to somebody, that when you go to a convention, there's 1,000 people queuing up for your autograph. And I know he gets some stick, and I know he does recently there was criticism about him on a recent Q&A talking about Renaissance art, but nobody mentioned in that criticism that it was during the writer's strike, the actor's strike, where you're not allowed to talk about your films. So he wasn't going to speak about RoboCop then because he wasn't allowed to. But but we've had experience of him. I know Chris Eastwood had, but I think, as Eastwood said, I think a lot of it is an act. When he sat down in that chair for the lads and held that gun, he was like a kid in a candy store. Really,
we didn't have to preempt him.
Yeah.
We didn't have to like tee him up with anything. He's either got the best memory in the world, and he can remember a film after seeing it twice in 1987, 30 years later. I reckon another thing too, just thinking about it as Gary was speaking, then he's got a young son who's like 10, and I think when we interviewed Peter at the very end of the interview, he asked about trying to track down a helmet for his son. And I think maybe the fact that his son's probably into like superhero, I don't know. I'm just guessing, speculating. But you see him at conventions. I saw him the other day on YouTube where he literally loaded up his son on a phone to like do it when he was doing like a live web thing. So I reckon he's probably relishing a little bit and like enjoying that side of it. That to his son he was a superhero, and 30 years ago. Look at Dad signing some autographs as Robocop. I don't know. I'm just speculating. But thinking about the timing of it, his son would have been what, like 5, 6 when we started looking into getting him or something. So
the guy is a force. The guy is an absolute force of nature, and we again showing that we don't sugarcoat things. We like to take the honest approach with things, and I can hand on heart say that the 2 encounters I've had with him, your stomach's in your throat, or however that works, your heart is in your throat. You're so anxious, but he's just such an interesting character. And again, much like Verhoeven, if it wasn't for him, his mindset, his personality, his approach to things, we wouldn't have one of the best robotic performances there's ever been.
Yeah.
So it's just the caveat. But, again, one of the challenges and one of the things I think we really enjoyed about this whole project was, certainly when it comes to the interviewing is, navigating that conversation with people, which might start off a bit like, okay, I'm here to answer your questions, to actually, no, let's get it to a conversational point. And he absolutely did that with us. We had him for what, 4.5 hours, give or take.
Wow, that's great.
And watching our relationship, and even though it was like this over, a Zoom conversation, blossom before our eyes was just absolutely incredible, and then that's where we were able to kind of then start going like, oh, okay, he seems quite chummy now. Okay, let's talk about Oreo Gate. Let's talk about this and that,
I was saying actually to a pal just this week about how the start of our interview, Chris, with Peter was so cold, and he was like, where are these guys from? England? Have they got a sense of humor? And then by the end of it, he was literally, last thing he did was like blowing me and Chris kisses to like say, let us know. And it was just like it was like started here, and by the end of it, he was up here, and he was just like an old relative or something that was just happy to see his grandkids. It was bonkers. So
it's about cutting us out of his world, didn't he? So maybe we are his grandkids.
Well, yeah, because you guys are these younger guys. He doesn't know who the fuck you are, right? You're sitting down, and you're like, so, Mr. Weller, do you like acting? You're just shaking your hands.
He definitely doesn't suffer fools lightly, and you see that in that video Eastwood was on about. I watched that myself the other day, completely engrossed in it, and it's who he is, and no matter what the outcome would have been of our contact with him, I would still never not consider his performance like top tier. It just it's lucky that we can feel like, at least for a short period of time, it's like, oh, he's our friend, but haven't really spoken to him much since. But,
I like that. I like that he speaks at length about the emotional side of the character, which is something that I try to stress a lot. Eastwood, I know you saw my video on Robocop as a drama, because I just feel like no one talks about Alex Murphy, like the character journey, right? And that's what I value so much, is what I connect to more and more every time I watch it. And to hear Peter Weller speak so fondly of the character and not just about his performance like in the suit. There's a part where he talks about the Murphy It's You line, and I wrote down what he said. Weller says, "It's heartbreaking. What a sad movie. Robocop essentially is extraordinarily sad." And I was like, yes. People don't think of it as a sad movie, but it's so tragic. Yeah, it's funny. It's got some great action. It has amazing effects and satire, but Jesus, it is a sad movie.
My wife gives me shit for, like, at the start of our relationship, if we'd been on a night out with mates and then we come home, my go-to was always like, when you're drunk, you're like, I want my thing, my toy. So it was always 9 times out of 10 Robocop, and she's always given me shit for something I don't remember, where I was going like, Robocop's got soul. And actually, the best part is now having it. All it took was $200,000 and 7 years of stress to go out and do this documentary. But to hear that numerous times throughout and go, ha, see, I told you, and I feel hopefully this is what RoboDoc does, because the thing with a film like Robocop and the title, when you tell people it's your favorite film, if they don't know that film well enough, then you're just going to get like sniggers or people kind of side-eye you a bit like, really, Robocop? I'm hoping that at least what we do with this documentary will help people understand. It's like, this is why I've been telling you it's the greatest film ever made. Because there's just so many layers to it. And I think that's what will always be part of its longevity, is just the way you can appeal it in many, many ways.
I find that is typically a symptom of people not having seen the movie since they were kids. Because whenever I talk to someone about RoboCop and they're like, oh yeah, man, I haven't seen it in 20 years. I saw it when I was 10 or something like that. And they're 30 now. I'm like, you need to watch it with adult eyes. It is a very different movie. You can get similar experience from rewatching Ghostbusters, right? Like when you're 6, what do you remember from Ghostbusters? You remember Slimer and the Ghost Trap and all that stuff, and then you watch it when you're 35, and now you're just belly laughing just from the interest payment joke when they walk out of the bank with the loan for the Ghostbusters headquarters. It becomes such a different experience, and RoboCop is very much like that. It changes for me. It's changed every era of my life. I've felt very differently about it.
Took the words out of my mouth there, mate. Sadly enough, I watched Ghostbusters 1 and 2 yesterday, and that very much as well, the interest payments alone. You're right.
We're experiencing it as well in another sort of chapter, which is being a parent. Like Chris and I have become parents, like in the last couple of years, and your tastes do change when you become a parent. There's certain things that you don't want to listen to, or certain things that you just lean into a bit more. And I think with RoboCop, again, watching it, it's a different experience now being a dad. And that film's just perfect. Aside from the Dick Jones arms, it's a perfect film.
I intentionally left that scene out of my video because I was so focused on the dramatic elements of it that when I got to the end shootout scene, I cut before he falls through the window because I didn't want to spoil the emotional rise of my video analysis. I was like, I'm going to ruin this by showing the Dick Jones. It's like they should have just cut away from it in editing anyway, right? Like why not? Why leave it in?
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall when Verhoeven watched that effect shot on his in his edit suite. I would have loved to have seen what he did. We should have asked Frank about that actually, but we didn't. But yeah, it's still, like Chris has mentioned it before, it's so zany, the film, and by that point you just you get an extra laugh out of it. But we as fans, we're trying to convince people that it's the best movie ever made, and then it gets to that one point and you're always sort of sat there next to them going,
oh no, the DVD broke up, shit.
Because it's followed up by the greatest emotional moment or one of the best moments in the movie, where he turns and smiles for the first time, and says his name, and it comes right after this awful puppet shot.
It's the sound design as well. That sound design of him landing when it's like a thump, thump. It's such a cool effect, and I think Stephen Hunterflex put it on there to try and ground it, to say like, stop laughing. He's like, like that. It's over. It's such a cool, when you listen to that just isolated, it's such like a boom boom boom, and then it's literally like the heart thudding, and then you've got the delivery of the old man and then Murphy. So yeah, it is just that is just that one thing. I'm surprised that somebody hasn't asked for the 4K to like tweak that shot. I wouldn't want them to, but I'm surprised that we've not seen a version where that shot's been fixed.
Apart from RoboDoc.
Oh.
We did do it in RoboDoc. I enjoyed doing that actually. It did make me sad doing it, but I was like, here we go. And the thing, that's a good point actually, Chris. So in Mayo, in that explanation in the documentary where we show it, and we have Rocco, who actually performed the stop motion and designed the Dick Jones puppet, he talks about the lens distortion, and that's the reason why the arms are so elongated because of the lens that they used on the camera. The puppet's actually fine in person, which it is because we've seen images of it and whatnot. But Rocco gave me those lens. I asked Rocco what the actual lens focal point was, so that we could get those to be as accurate as possible on the screen. And he was sort of like, when I messaged him, I could just tell that he was just a bit disappointed about that whole effect, the fact that he's having to explain it in a documentary. Because everything else that he did, it was so surprising that he even got asked to do the stop motion. I think, the fact that he was a matte painter and that they asked him to do it.
Well, guys, we only got a couple minutes left on the call before Zoom shuts down, and I am not paying for an upgrade. Gary, I love the Jack Nicholson Joker with the sunglasses behind you. That is fucking amazing. All that stuff is really cool. All right. Do any of you guys have the Hot Toys Ed 209 replica?
I've got an Ed 209 in there. I don't know what one it is, but you probably can't see it at the moment. But it's not
the NECA one. I don't have the. Are you talking about the one that's signed by Phil Tippett?
I'm talking about the one that's like it's like a 1.5 feet tall and it's sound and everything. I wouldn't.
We can't afford that.
Oh, okay.
all our money goes into these documentaries. Sure. So,
well, I hope.
Have we covered enough, Mayo? Was there anything else? Because like these guys, I don't know if these guys want to rush off, but you can always schedule another call if you wanted to like get in another 15 minutes or something.
Oh, I think I pretty much covered what I wanted to. Cool. I mean, we don't have to go over Ronald Reagan getting assassinated. I had no idea. I know Reagan, but I didn't know he retired in Santa Barbara. So when I heard that, I was like, oh God.
I just wanted to say while we're on the call, actually, mate, is that I've obviously subscribed to your channel, but I've realised that I watched your Rogue City video the other day.
Oh,
it's just like oh shit, that's the one I watched the other day.
Yeah. So, hope you enjoyed it.
You've honestly got some of this is how I found you. You've got the one of the highest. If you type in Robo on YouTube, you're like highest ranking or up there.
I'm happy about it.
I looked at that and I was like, right, because you get so many like Robocop reviews or Robocop analysis, but the fact that in the description it said this is my favorite movie, I was like, I'm going to give this a shot.
Yeah, and thanks for reaching out. Thanks for reaching out to me. This has been great, guys. So thank you so much for joining me, Gary, Chris, Eastwood. It's been amazing, and good luck with part 2. And talk about Prime Directives. I'm going to talk about Prime Directives next week, so come back to my channel.
Oh, can't wait. I'll be watching that when I'm making my dinner.
All right, guys, have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.